Welcome back. So, for the week ending December 20th, 2025, the Indian markets gave us a real head scratcher. One of those weeks where all the economic signs were pointing straight up, but the stock market, well, it told a completely different story. So, let's dive in and solve this puzzle together. So, this is the big question we're going to unpack. We had incredibly low inflation, a strengthening rupee, and even falling oil prices. I mean, these are all classic textbook signs of a healthy, humming economy. So, why on earth did the major stock market indices end the week in the red? It just doesn't add up, right? This was a classic week of mixed signals. It's a perfect example of how the big numbers that everyone watches, they just don't always tell you the real story happening underneath. Okay, so first, let's set the scene with all the good news. Because honestly, on paper, the economic backdrop was incredibly positive. This is the kind of news you'd normally expect to send the markets soaring. Get this. Consumer inflation for November came in at just 0.71%. That is ridiculously low. It's a huge relief for everyone's household budget. And, it's basically a big green light for the central bank. Really good news. And on top of that, global oil prices actually fell. Brent crude dropped about 2% for the week. Now, for a major oil importer like India, that's fantastic news. It helps lower our national import bill, and it keeps a lid on any future inflation. Another win. And the good news just kept coming. To add to this positive picture, the Indian rupee actually got stronger against the US dollar by over 1%. A stronger currency like this, that's a clear sign of economic stability and investor confidence. And it wasn't just a domestic story. Even the global picture was supportive. The US Federal Reserve, the Fed, cut its main interest rate. That usually tends to be really good for emerging markets like India, because it encourages global money to flow towards higher growth economies. So everything seems perfect, right? Well, not so fast. This is where our story gets complicated, because despite that perfect economic cocktail we just talked about, the stock market's reaction was, well, it was completely counterintuitive. Let's look at the numbers that really created this puzzle. And here is the mystery, right in plain sight. The Nifty 50, the Sensex, the Bank Nifty, all of India's major headline indices, they all ended the week lower. It's a sea of red right where every other signal was screaming that we should be seeing green. This is the core of our puzzle. Now, to add just a little more confusion to the mix, industrial production data for October showed that growth had slowed way down to just 0.4%. Okay, sure, you could argue this was partly because of the festival season and fewer working days, but it still gave investors a reason to kind of pause and think. And this chart, wow, it really captures the market's split personality this week. I mean, look at this. On one side, you had safe havens like gold and silver rallying right alongside smaller, riskier stocks. But then, on the other side, the big benchmark indices and the bank stocks were all falling. It's a total divergence. So what is really going on here? To solve this mystery, you really only have to do one thing: follow the money. The key here isn't just what was being traded, but who was doing the buying and who was doing the selling. So, the two main players in this story are the FIIs, or foreign institutional investors. You can just think of them as large global funds. And then you have the DIIs, the domestic institutional investors, and that's our Indian-based funds, like local mutual funds. And their actions this week? Well, they were polar opposites. And here it is. This is the aha moment. What we're looking at is basically a financial tug-of-war. Foreign investors, the FIIs, were net sellers. They pulled out nearly 1,000 crore rupees. But at the exact same time, domestic investors, the DIIs, were net buyers, pumping in almost 1,500 crore. So here's the crucial detail. It's all about where that money was going. The foreign selling was focused on the big blue chip companies, the reliable household names that make up the Nifty and Sensex. That's why those indices fell. But meanwhile, domestic investors were pouring all that money into smaller companies. And that's why the mid-cap and small-cap indices actually gained about 1%. So you see, this wasn't a panic. It wasn't people running for the exits. It was just a strategic repositioning. And we saw hard evidence of this in things called block deals. These are huge, pre-arranged trades between big institutions. For example, there was a massive 91 crore rupee trade in Shriram Finance. This just goes to show you that the big players were shuffling their portfolios, not losing faith. Okay, so we've gathered all the clues, we've followed the money, so what's the final verdict on our market puzzle this week? The final answer is this. The market wasn't weak at all. It was simply rotating. Money was just moving from one part of the market, the big large cap stocks, into another part, the mid and small caps. And it was all being driven by two very different groups of investors. So, to sum up the whole story of the week, first, foreign investors decided to take some money off the table from the biggest companies. That dragged down the main indices we all watch. But domestic investors saw this as a golden opportunity, and they showed real confidence by buying into that next tier of promising, smaller companies. This really shows an underlying strength that the headline numbers just completely missed. And looking ahead, this dynamic is absolutely key. It seems that with foreign investors still playing it a bit cautious, it's the domestic money from both big funds and everyday people that's going to be in the driver's seat for the near future. Which leaves us with a final and pretty fascinating question to think about. We now have this real tension in the market, global trends pulling one way and strong domestic confidence pulling the other. So which of these powerful forces is going to win out and steer the market's direction from here? We'll definitely be watching.